and taking the MIST to scale. You could go from a lot of contacts but a small number of people who were actually successfully housed to moving a much greater number of those contacts into permanent housing and off the streets. Okay, so this next one is homeless systems change in a slide. This is creating a direct and low barrier pathways to housing. So you have some county and city leadership within the staff leadership who understand housing first and have made real strides, and they're the ones who have really created all the successes that we've been talking about. That's not the same thing as the whole system being oriented to offering housing, because, and this is not sort of bad on Humboldt County or the city of Eureka. In fact, this is how homeless systems have operated for the, since the 80s when they really were created. They were organically created and everybody was just serving the next person in front of them. And we didn't really have systems and pathways out to permanent housing. So it's time to move in that direction, and the things that you would need to accomplish that include diversion, which I mentioned at the beginning, and this really is about having system-wide diversion where instead of people just falling into homelessness and then becoming perhaps more impacted by their disabilities or developing disabilities related to mental health and substance abuse in particular, and then sort of having that become worse and worse, what you do is you keep people from becoming chronically homeless or even longer-term homeless by housing them really quickly. That takes a concerted effort, and it does take some resources. Per person, it's actually very inexpensive. So it's a worthwhile investment and cheaper, generally speaking, than any alternative, including emergency shelter. Interim housing. So recently the MAC transitioned and became an interim housing or a short-term stay transitional housing where people could be there for a short amount of time, and then again that focus on short length of stay and moving people out to permanent housing. You may in fact need more interim housing. I think it is worth putting some of the pieces together in terms of the first steps of the implementation plan and then deciding what those next steps are in terms of interim housing. Rapid rehousing. So rapid rehousing is a fairly new program type, and rapid rehousing is about quickly moving people of all different types into housing and then providing services to people while they're housed. Some people may just need a brief rental subsidy and that's it. They can get back on their feet and make it successfully. Other people may need more support for a longer period of time. Currently, this community has very little rapid rehousing, very little. So taking rapid rehousing to scale is going to be a key strategy in order to see a visible reduction in homelessness. And then finally, permanent supportive housing. This is the most expensive intervention type, and this type is typically where you have a long-term rental subsidy plus ongoing services, which are typically mental health and substance abuse treatment services, which are coupled with and sort of anchored by significant case management. It's a really whatever it takes type of model and is overwhelmingly incredibly successful. You have currently successful permanent supportive housing programs operating in your community. It's the most expensive model, so of course it needs to go to only the people who, but for that resource, cannot be housed. So again, really looking at that targeting and thinking about housing first and rapidly rehousing people and then seeing how they do and adding more supports later, if needed. Okay, I think I just talked through all of that. Let's see. Oh, no. Okay, good. So diversion, the specific pieces of diversion to implement here are really around problem solving, mediation. These are low-cost or no-cost solutions. So this is typically somebody is asked to leave. They've been staying, let's say, at their brother's house. they've been asked to leave, and then so I can't stay there anymore. They're either headed to the streets or they're trying to get into like the MAC or another homeless program. Instead of taking people into the program, instead you say, well, where have you been staying? I've been staying with my brother. Okay, why can't you stay there anymore? Well, because, he lost his job also, and, right, they don't have the resources to support me there, and I keep eating their food because I don't have any money, and so this is what's happening, right? So you actually have mediation that talks through how do you get people the resources that they need, and what could you pay for? For example, we've seen situations where paying a couple $100s in groceries that were owed actually resolved the situation and the person was able to stay. Now that's not going to work necessarily the 10th time, but if you catch it early enough, it can in fact work and be very successful. So that's an example of a very low cost. When you consider the cost of homelessness being very high, that's an extremely low cost solution to an imminent problem. Okay, so interim housing. Some of the things that have shifted, the MAC has successfully made a lot of shifts. This is about having low barriers to entry. This is the kind of thing that's really important to understand in terms of getting everybody rowing in the same direction. It can't be, well, people can't come into my program if they have pets. They can't come in if they are drunk. They can't come in if this. They can't come in, right? The more rules you have, the more likely it is that the people who need support the most to get housed are just going to stay outside. And the people who come in and who we do transition are the lowest barrier members of the homeless community. Homeless people in general are very, very often resolve their own homelessness. In fact, we have so few rental subsidies as a nation that are targeted to homeless people. Most homeless people come into a shelter here or there, at some point in time exit homelessness without any subsidy, without any housing support. Maybe they used a shelter or whatever, but that's it. So to focus our resources on the people who could have housed themselves anyway, instead of the people who are going to be outside because they're not able to move themselves through it, is not very cost effective. Okay. All right. So I talked a bit about rapid rehousing in that model and how rapid rehousing is about a short-term rental subsidy, and it's pairing that with housing search and placement. It's a lot of working with landlords, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. I do want to mention that can include shared situations, shared housing situations. That's not going to work for everybody who's homeless, and you don't want to try it with everybody who's homeless. But it can work for people, and that can create a situation that is affordable, where two people in a two-bedroom can each come up with enough money to pay the rent. And I think in this particular community with this particular housing market, that's an important consideration. Okay. All right. The only other thing that I want to mention about the model itself is that you have housing search assistance. So you're going to actually help people find apartments and find places that they can afford. And frankly, you're going to help people find apartments because you've been developing relationships with landlords. And you have some incentives for landlords and some real infrastructure and programming so that landlords feel assured that this is going to work out for them. That this is going to be a reasonable deal. That can take a while to create, but it can be wildly successful. Okay. All right, and then permanent supportive housing. So a couple of other key things to mention about permanent supportive housing is that it is permanent. So it's generally a long-term subsidy. In this particular community, you don't currently use your Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8, and you don't currently have Shelter Plus Care, And so, which is a federal program. It's sort of like the HCV program, deep rental subsidies on a permanent basis, but they must serve homeless people with disabilities. You currently don't have those or don't have those targeted to homeless people, so that's a key resource to look at. All right. This order got a little shuffled, sorry. Okay. So I think I already talked about bringing rapid rehousing to scale and targeting those most expensive resources to the people who, but for those resources, can't be housed. So rapid rehousing, you really want to use with everybody. And you want to use that first unless something else cheaper has already been tried. Okay. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about using data to track progress. So you have a homeless management information system, or HMIS. That system is managed by the county, and it is a federally mandated system, and it collects all the information that you need in order to develop information about performance of your homeless programs. So this is really important because all of the decisions in the world and all of the plans in the world are only plans until you put them into action and see what they're actually accomplishing. So having that information in HMIS is mission critical to actually know whether what you're doing is making the difference that you hope that it will, and if it's not, what isn't working so that you can fix it. So really you're looking at who is coming into these programs that you've aligned or created. Are they getting housed? Are you targeting as deeply as you need to? Are you seeing reductions in homelessness? And are you seeing people return to homelessness? Those are all things that you can improve your performance if you know how you're performing. Okay, here we go. Implementation plan. So hopefully for those of you who read the report, the last few pages of the body of the report are a table, which has got a lot of colors in it. We tried to organize the colors by area of work. And really what we were trying to do is take all of these strategies, which are very much about how to think about ending homelessness and what types of things you need compared to what you have, and really put them into a very clear and concrete plan for what you need to do in order to see a real difference in the size of your homeless population. So you already have a leadership group. We would suggest you continue that, make sure it's the right fit for this moving forward, and see if any shifts are needed. I think it's worth repeating that having a leadership group who really understands what these strategies are and embraces the overall housing first approach is really critical to being successful, because there are a million ways to work on homelessness and a very small number that actually reduce homelessness. Distraction is easy to come by, and really being clear and having the leadership make sure that all of the stakeholders and all of the staff and all of the programs are rowing in the same direction will make the difference, and that's what the communities who are significantly reducing homelessness have in place. We recommend that you launch a 30-60 campaign, which is to house 30 chronically homeless people in the first 60 days. You will need to do some little bit more planning and organizing around, so what are your housing, how are you going to get to having these interventions that we've recommended? How are you going to align the funding sources that we've identified in that appendix to the report to make sure that you have the resources available to house people and provide the needed services? And what we've laid out for you is a pretty aggressive plan to get there, and then to see some immediate success with people who are chronically homeless. And you can think about that in different ways, but you can think about that in terms of people for whom there are the most service calls, or the people who enter, the psychiatric hospital the most, or there's lots of different ways to look at that, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can pick how you want to handle that. You can look at vulnerability of the people that you have sleeping outside. But that would be a huge visible impact, and I think would show the success of the strategies